Hello, and welcome to day 12 of our daily Bible reading. We are looking at Genesis chapter 29 to 30 and Luke chapter 12 today. We get to the part of the story where Jacob, who has left his family, Isaac and Rebekah and Esau, he has been traveling to the land where Rebekah's brother Laban lives. So this is where Isaac went to get a wife, and now Jacob is working on getting a wife here. So he comes up to a well, and it is a large well with a very large stone on top of it. And this is the place where people come to water their flocks. Now, we're told in the story that normally it takes multiple people to move this stone because it is so large. Jacob sees Rachel and immediately falls in love. And he uses his own strength all by himself, maybe enhanced a little bit by love or perhaps God. He moves the stone for Rachel. Now, Rachel then runs off to her father, and Jacob is in love. And they make an agreement with Rachel's father, Laban, that Jacob will work for 7 years in order to earn Rachel's hand in marriage. Now, this is where the trickster Jacob gets tricked. Because what Laban does is that Jacob works for the 7 years and then has his wedding. And in the morning, he discovers that he is waking up with the sister Leah and not with his beloved Rachel. In the culture of the time, the women of the family, the daughters, were married off in the order of birth. And so the tradition was that Rachel couldn't get married before Leah because Rachel was the second daughter. And so, on one hand, Laban is following a tradition in marrying his first daughter off first before Rachel. But he clearly tricks Laban. This is not agreed upon beforehand. The other interesting dynamic of this story is that the Bible really doesn't have very many stories of romantic love. People get married because they're from the right tribe, they're the right person to marry. It's just what needs to happen. It's not really about romantic love. Now, Isaac had a romantic love for Rebekah, and here we have Jacob having a romantic love for Rachel, but this does not often happen in the Hebrew scriptures. Because of this tradition of the first daughter getting married first, there is some tradition thinking that Rachel was actually part of the plan by Laban to have Leah get married first. And Jacob has maybe given some tokens to Rachel because maybe Jacob has some idea that something might go a little bit funny on his wedding night. But perhaps Rachel has given these items to Leah because Rachel does not want her older sister to be humiliated of not being married before the second daughter gets married. We don't know exactly the full dynamics of what is going on here, but only a week later, Jacob does get the opportunity and does marry Rachel then. He does have to work for another 7 years, but he doesn't work for the 7 years first and then has the second wedding. He has the second wedding after just a week, and then he continues working for Laban. After these weddings, we have another story of fertility problems. Leah, the wife who is not beloved, has lots of babies. Rachel, the wife that is beloved, has infertility problems. In some ways, this marks her as one of the matriarchs or mothers of the faith because Sarah had problems conceiving children, Rebecca had problems, and now Rachel is having problems. This, of course, leads to the same types of family dynamic problems that Sarah and Hagar had. There is jealousy. There's the jealousy of the husband's love and care and affection. There's jealousy of the children that are born to the different women. Just like Sarah, Leah and Rachel decide to have their own plans for getting more children as well, and they offer their servants to Jacob. And each of the servants' childs then brings status to the wives who are associated with those servants. And again, Leah's servant has a number of children. All of the children of these 4 women become the 12 sons of Jacob. And each of those sons is the father or patriarch to one of the tribes of Israel. So all of this gamesmanship and jealousy and envy and the whole dynamic going on here does lead to the development of the structure of the tribe of Israel. After this story, we end up going into the final story of Jacob's time with Laban. And here we're getting another set of gamesmanship around flocks. Both Laban and Jacob are trying to negotiate and come up with the best deal for themselves, and it has to do with speckled and mottled and streaked flocks. Jacob still manages to outsmart Laban, and Jacob ends up quite wealthy and manages to leave. We will get to what actually happens when Jacob leaves Laban in the next story, but it just seems that every time we turn around, Jacob is trying to work the angles, trying to figure things out, trying to get the upper hand for whoever he is in relationship with. And this causes a lot of complications in his life. And I think one of the things that we have to think about is how often are we trying to manipulate a situation, trying to make things come out better for ourselves, but we aren't necessarily living with honesty. We're not necessarily living with accountability and transparency. And what are the impacts that that has on the relationships within our community? When we look at Luke chapter 12, we have this story that Jesus tells about building storage homes. And this wealthy guy who's grown lots of grain, and he decides to build more barns, more storage units in order to store everything that he has. So here the question is, how much stuff do we need? When we have more and more stuff, we have to move the stuff, we have to insure the stuff, we have to have buildings for the stuff, we have to maintain the stuff. We keep building bigger houses and getting more storage units. And I wonder, is our focus on the stuff, or is our focus on our relationship with God and our community? In verse 33, Jesus is advocating that we share our possessions with those in need, that those who have more share so that all have enough. In verse 35, Jesus goes on to talk about the need to be ready for Jesus and the Master to return. The story continues in verse 45, where there's an elder of a family who has gotten tired waiting for Jesus to return, for the Master to return. And in this impatience, the elder starts abusing the family, starts exploiting the resources, and is not ready when the Master returns, and has not cared for the resources appropriately for when the Master does return. So this story ends with verse 47, where Jesus is pointing out that there are problems for those who know the right ways but choose not to walk in them. This theme of journeying with Jesus, of knowing Jesus' teachings, but then not hearing them, not seeing them, not putting them into action, continues here. And our question for ourselves today is, how are we living? Are we living with generosity? Are we living to make sure that resources are shared so that all have enough? The ways that we can do it in our world today, we can make donations to nonprofits. We can pay taxes that cover the needs of the entire community. Many of our leaders right now are really emphasizing a message of individualism and selfishness. Get as much as you can for yourself and your own. Take care of yourself. Acquire lots of stuff. And don't spend as much time thinking about the needs of the community, the needs of our neighbors. And so this is a very different message than what many of us are hearing today. And it can be quite a challenging one. This ties into the idea of tithing, where we should be giving a tenth of our resources to God's work in the world. And so this is a big question for us. This is a big teaching for us to really wrestle with in our own personal lives today. Now, verse 51 is a section that has caused a lot of consternation, and I've gotten some comments online that Jesus isn't a peacemaker, but here Jesus says he comes to bring conflict, to bring a sword, and he separates people, and people will be taking sides against each other. But I think in light of the passages that come before this, this little odd section is not saying that Jesus is not a peacemaker to bring people together, but rather The conflict comes from the challenge of what it means to share, to live generously, to love your neighbor and care for them. The people who don't want to do this are going to be standing up against the people who are trying to live by walking with Jesus, to walking in Jesus' way, and to putting Jesus' teaching into action. So I think the real conflict here is not Jesus himself, but rather the people who are following selfish desires instead of sharing with community and living with generosity. Jesus ends this chapter by reminding us that we are to be working things out. We are to be finding the ways to live together. So thank you for going through this section with me today, and we'll see you next time.